It is my pleasure to introduce to you the Globally Connect at FIT series. This series is led by students, faculty, and alumni with open formats to introduce global education and FIT in our new world without mobility. The major themes that will unfold throughout the series are fashion, art, sustainability, racial equity, and life in the pandemic around the world. Co-organized by Helen Gaudet, Assistant Dean of International Education, and Alexander Nagel, Professor of Arts History, this is FIT's first and hopefully of many virtual discussion events on global affairs. The discussion today is titled Conversations for the Future, Mapping the World After the Pandemic, with Eva Mayhabal Davis, arts advocator and curator, and Angelica Pomar, FIT Arts History and Museum Profession Senior, who studied in Florence spring 2020. Please welcome Eva and Angelica. Take it away, Angelica.
So much. Hello.
Thank you so much, Anya, for that introduction, and thank you, Eva, for being here with us today. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first student-led program in the Globally Connected at FIT series, known as Conversations for the Future, Mapping the Art World After the Pandemic. I'm Angelica Pomar. As Anya mentioned, I'm a senior in the Art History and Museum Professions program, and with me here today is guest speaker Eva Mayhabal Davis. We'll be discussing the current climate of the art world and how adapting to changes brought forth by the pandemic affect BIPOC, women, immigrants, and those who identify as queer and trans artists and art workers. We'll also be taking a look at some selected projects from Eva and how her practice has invited more representation of these marginalized identities within art spaces and exhibitions. In addition, some of Eva's projects will include this notion of community in the art world. So before we begin, I would like to quickly mention a few reminders on today's program. We would prefer if your camera and microphone is off for the duration of the program so that way we can fully spotlight the presentation. Throughout the duration of the program as well, they will be recorded. So if you guys want to go back and view the presentation again, it will be available online and through the FIT archives. If you would like to comment or ask a question, you can do so using the chat box function found at the top of your screen, and Q&A will be prioritized towards the end of the presentation. So you're welcome to also ask and question before that. Just know that we might not be able to answer right away until after the presentation. With all this being said, we strongly encourage you to participate in today's discussion. Please feel free to ask away. We would like this conversation to become a larger dialogue amongst students, faculty, and friends who are here today. So now we're going to transition into today's program by having Eva introduce herself, along with her practice and some projects that she would like to highlight as well. So go ahead, Eva. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and just extend my appreciation for bringing together this amount of voices. Angelica, thank you so much for reaching out and for really kind of thinking about these spaces and hubs where we can talk about ideas, not just in the present and future tense, but in thinking about how to implement them as we go forward. Because it serves nobody for us to just be talking about it and not thinking about the actionables and what that's going to look like as we move forward, especially under circumstances that request, that demand from us that we think critically of how we're going to fundamentally change the way that we view arts, culture, and what our role is in perpetuating all of that. With that said, a lot of the work that I do involves all of these different trajectories, starting with museum education, starting as a museum guide, and in understanding the connection and bridge between the artwork, what the artist left for us to view, and the viewers. Next. All of that also bringing together through ideas of public programming, most of which needs to be reevaluated. It needs to be rethought. And I think that creativity is a huge part of this. We cannot forget that we are now engaging in new digital platforms, limited physical presence, But where did the need for that come from? It came from gathering and coming together to share these ideas. Programming is an essential part of the way that I curate exhibitions. As a curator, as an arts advocate, I bring all of these things together. Next. My main goal in that too is that it extends from where the art is in the gallery wall all the way to where art is in your hands. My intention is to spark creativity and curiosity, and not to follow mandates of hierarchies of where museums are or galleries are, but rather that we are all involved in that process. This is myself participating in a workshop for an artist that I curated into an exhibition in Smack Mellon in 2019, a show that kind of brought together this programming, but at the end of the day was really just an open forum for an artist to design the way that they wanted to present their work. In this case, Blanca Mascua, an artist, an art educator, brought together all of that in putting together a set of programs of workshops for the exhibition. Next. What I think is really key to also reimagining our work within the arts is not so much the final outcome, but the process. Again, my background in museum education, in presenting and seeing art, in community-based programs, in the way that food is shared, all of these are crucial in process. They embed values that I believe in, both outside and inside. And in this case, it's about storytelling too. I write and bring together these projects that I know are really important in historicizing, in that the Western academic world has prioritized this essential way of recording and having written word. I want to integrate these new stories into the future of art history. It's what we're living today. I encourage you to write about what you see. And as such, I've involved myself in projects through writing as well, and giving it that importance and writing it down. This magazine I've contributed several essays to In Focal magazine, a photography archive based out of the South Bronx. Next. Also, giving art its placement everywhere. I was invited to curate an exhibition for the New York Immigration Coalition, the largest immigration support network in the state of New York. They're based on 34th Street, and their office is the place where clients meet, students meet, lawyers meet. The city officials and policy is written in the conference room of this office. What does it look like when you have sterile spaces? And following just the spaces, that mood of the space, what does it look like when you integrate life into it? We did this through art, through images and works by the very people that they are looking to work with, help, and advocate for. Next. Their conference room. I added paintings, magazines, photography, imagery. Next. We hosted events there too, beyond the work that they do as an office space, but to also bring in other art workers, other advocates, and find the intersection of their political and social consciousness. Next. Also, in putting together these spaces, finding time, again, to connect through an educational approach. Programs and education are often departments separated from curatorial departments in larger institutions. We see this in museums. Sometimes you can see it in academic spaces where you have artists in one end, writers in another place, filmmakers in another place. There should be that one hub where it all connects, whether in this case, legal advocacy that's being done for social issues and immigration reform, and the community that's impacted, artists that tell the story through writing, through filmmaking, through photography, and also just through educating the youth. This project also had a pop-up kind of component to it, where I went to different community fairs, where I just popped up in the same way that we passed out information about the coalition. We passed out coloring books designed by immigrant artists. We passed out color pencils and other art material with the goal of planting the seed of creativity. Next. A project that I was able to take into a museum setting was a co-op, the Workers Studio, photography and community projects by the artist Sola Ramendi. In curating her show, it was not just a matter of the space, the placement, and the work itself and writing about it, but also thinking about the programming that would engage and bring together the community to practice and consider how they practice the work around collaboration, asking key questions about what it means to work as a co-op, both as a business model, financially, also as a day-to-day. Next. The space brought in work by community artists and members like Mujeres en Movimiento, co-op businesses that use the skills that they learned in a photography workshop to market their business, using that power of the image and translating it not just as a fine art, but as a marketing tool for their growth and empowerment, for that matter. Next. And I can go more into detail about the advocacy aspect of a co-op and how to be more cooperative as the foundational question of this exhibition. Thinking about how cooperation, co-op business models, and collaborative models are direct antithesis to capitalist models. How a co-op and the co-op mentality brings together a theory of change to consider democracy, sustainability, equity, equality, several values that have in the last year gained a lot of traction and awareness, not just as a trend, but now even more so as a political wake-up call. Something like this, collaborative values that have already been embedded and integral to immigrant communities. Next. Here you get another image and perspective of people asked to participate, to give that voice to the viewer beyond what the artist designed, beyond what the artist facilitated, beyond the restrictions of what a museum is, where you can't touch anything. Here there was a designated area for full participation. Next. Finally, convivencia. In Spanish, that word means coming together to live together. There's no direct translation in English because our language and culture does not allow for that coming together as one objective and as one verb. The project El Salón is about convivencia. It's about coming together to share food, to share ideas, to hear each other. And so I host potlucks, again, with a value economy ingrained into it. We can share food, we can share ideas, we can share time and space, and in New York City, where this project is based, that is so valuable. Just the time you take to come out, to participate, to bring food, to share an idea. It's valuable everywhere, but for some reason, in places that are busy, a slow time like this to get together becomes even more valuable and more intimate too. El Salón, the potluck, is a project that's been happening for over 3 years on a monthly basis. Each evening is curated to have one artist, 2 or 3 presentations about their work, about what they're thinking about, maybe a performance, maybe trying out a performance that they wanted to present somewhere else, maybe watching a short movie and taking the time to dissect it, taking the time to talk about it, to give feedback on it. Something very similar that you may have done in school, but at this point, bringing it into a larger community space. Next. One of the spaces that I was invited to keep hosting these potlucks was at Decolonize This Place back in 2015, an exhibition that was set up at Artist Space for a run of 3 months throughout the fall. In that space, it brought together activists, it brought together writers, it brought together filmmakers, and all of these different ideas of what visual language and representation looks like as a social justice program. El Salón, just the very fact that you can translate that into classroom, living room, beauty parlor, all of these places where convivencia happens, where you can learn a lot from one another and share a lot. Next. Another evening there. Next. Next. Unfortunately, I have very few images or recordings of these happenings because they're happening, because they're present time, and it demands everyone's attention and care. It demands your attention to the detail and to the empathy that you develop over listening to each other's stories. At the end of each potluck, I started taking photos, seeing the diversity of folks that would stop by. Next. The varied amount of folks that would stop by, whether it was 4 people or 40 people. Next. And different spaces. At this point, collaborating with spaces across the city, from the Bronx to Queens to Brooklyn, across Manhattan too. Spaces and gallery spaces that I would request just to have one evening open to welcome in a community that would spend the evening discussing issues contemporary, not just to art practices, but to their lives. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Eva, for that presentation. It was really wonderful to get to know your work more and to introduce it to all us students, faculty, and friends here today. So I think we're going to go ahead and transition the conversation into a more informal discussion where we'll discuss more ways that artists/art workers of these more marginalized groups could adapt to the existing situation in the art world today. And so I would first off like to ask you, Eva, if that's okay, how do we think about like how museums and art institutions can better represent these more marginalized identities in exhibitions? And I feel like in your projects, you have sort of entered these spaces with these really great ideas on collaboration, community, and really reinventing how we think about exhibitions. And I want to think, how has your experience been as a curator to sort of throughout this process to introduce this to these art spaces and to, like, you know, have that sort of process and practice?
Absolutely. Sometimes the experiences have been very open. They have been open in the sense that ideas are heard and ideas are supported. But most importantly, ideas are paid for. Because unfortunately, organizations, they have the platform, they have the physical building, and they have the means to attract an audience. And so for me to come in and provide that cultural content, programming, and network, and that being part of my job, the main support that I need to make sure that I receive is financial, because it does take time and because it does take resources. That's one. And in that practice is also thinking about what that equity looks like.
Right.
So what that equity looks like is getting the fair pay. It is advocating that my artists get the fair pay. It is advocating that their marketing goes to the community that this exhibition is for. So the representation is not just done on the front face of the marketing poster, but it's also done in the back end of who is being brought in, who is being invited, and who is receiving that financial support, which at this point, it isn't just a courtesy, it is part of livelihoods, considering too that we live in New York City, a city that prides itself in its culture and diversity.
Yeah, I think that's a really important segue into the next question that I had to ask, especially thinking about the other side of institutions and how much funding really matters in providing these sort of opportunities. So I think thinking about today, so with the lack of funding with these institutions, it's been particularly hard on people who work in these places, especially if they identify with these more marginalized identities, since today many were laid off, furloughed, or struggling to find a job or an internship. Do you think, despite all these difficulties, is there still some room for opportunity for artists / creatives in general to come up with more solutions as to how to deal with these difficult situations?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. This is fertile ground. This is fertile ground for imagination and for creativity. What are you looking to do? Do it yourself. Represent what you want to see. It always sounds really cheesy, but if you're going to be the change you want to see in the world, you have to do it. And if you were just laid off, look at that. You got some time.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that we have been conditioned to be afraid of. We have been conditioned to be afraid of losing our jobs. And for a very long time, I was in that boat of being afraid to speak up, of being afraid to report things, of being afraid of confronting my superiors, of even confronting my own peers, of working inside institutions that have hierarchies that are impossible to understand, not just logistically, but emotionally and financially. And at the end of the day, you have to remember that your community has your back.
Right. Yeah.
So what are you adding to it? What are you asking for it? What do you want to see out there? And I think that as we support the changes inside institutions, we support those changes not for the institutions, but for ourselves. The lack of finances, what does that do to? Why? Is it because philanthropy does not understand what needs to be supported? Is it because museums have all of these relationships with donors that are not donating enough? Is it because museums are instead deciding to continue dividing up budgets without the flexibility of responding to very human concerns of their staff? You're hearing now that museums have acquisition budgets, but are still not paying attention to their employees.
Yeah.
I am advocating for creating your own systems, period. You start to see this within smaller collectives. And once you start to see that in collectives, a lot of the times they're pushed into nonprofits without realizing that same structure in nonprofit exists, that you're again bound to your board members, you're again bound to your grants and responding to the voice of someone else instead of your own.
Yeah.
In the same way that you're learning to be creative, you must be creative entrepreneurs and collaborators for yourself.
I think that's a really wonderful point, especially today, thinking about how to approach these situations. I think thinking more positively and thinking, taking this time as an advantage to be proactive and see what's really wrong with these systems that are in place. I think it's really come to light a lot of situations throughout the world because of this pandemic. And, there definitely isn't like a lot of benefits of this pandemic. There's pros and cons, obviously, like nobody likes to be in this situation that we are in, especially virtually. But I think that you bring a strong point saying that there is still this need for you to go out there and make something happen for yourself if you see that there isn't anything happening to better that, if that makes sense.
Indeed.
Yeah. So another question I had was thinking about this importance of community within the arts. How does one find community in a more remote setting like we have today? How do you think BIPOC, trans, queer women creatives can benefit from being a part of this community?
Again, I go back to being the own holder of your community and creating that, reaching out fearlessly. And you see this remote community that we are bringing together. This existed before. I think one of my favorite projects that's out there, thanks to social media that I've been able to connect with, is the Queer Appalachia Collective. They're publishing magazines, they're doing art exhibitions, they're doing all sorts of things. That's only what I get to see online. But they have been a group of thriving queer artists in Appalachia. We have the internet. There is nothing remote about that. Even at its hardest points where internet is still a commodity, community is possible.
That's such an interesting point.
We have to be willing. That is very much part of it, which I know can be very difficult, exhausting, as we have found out, being on the computer all day, but also taking advantage of being able to come together in smaller, intimate spaces. I can't stress that enough. I've been doing the potlucks in Salon for over 3 years, and there were months, especially in the summertime, where on a Friday evening, no one showed up. It was just 3 people. And it was with those 3 people that we still continued the conversation. Because we were there. We were hanging out, sharing food, talking about something. And that consistency is super important in community building, that we are still present, that we are here, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, it's really important to, I think, highlight that with all of us being on the internet all the time, I think there's still community. And the internet, like you said, although it's still a commodity, it's still something that is an opportunity to go online and build a community, regardless of whether or not it's in real life, or if it's, there physically, because it's there. It's just not in front of you at the moment, but it's still there. I also wanted to ask, for students who are graduating soon from college and who have ideas of working in the art world in their career, considering how the pandemic has impacted the way we approach the arts, how can emerging artists / art workers find opportunities even though they may seem limited right now?
Absolutely. There's a lot of limitations, and this is where that creativity is going to have to kick in.
Yeah.
The hard skills of arts administrators, those hard skills will help you in any setting. Don't be afraid to apply for the jobs that may not be within the arts sector, but will just that will just sustain you. That's a really big part of it. For artists, it is about taking this time to create. It is about taking and pushing yourself in this time to find what's creative for you, whether it is your art practice, whether it is trying a new recipe every day, because there are highs and lows in this time. But know that all of that is part of your creativity. And at the end of the day, keep looking at art, whatever you're participating in. If you are able to, and if you can, at least for now, Chelsea's open, museums are opening up, art talks are still happening, the community is still going, it's doing its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as you navigate careers and applications for jobs, again, apply for everything. If you got 50% of the skills, go in, apply, do it. You're going to learn a lot from every single thing. Advocate for yourself and all of that. I myself did a career transition during this time. I joined an immigration law firm as a receptionist. When the building shut down, they were still able to accommodate and help me work from home. And besides my work as a receptionist, I also do one day of work as an art liaison for them. What I do with that is that lawyers, immigration lawyers, they're doing a lot of this work pro bono, and to help with a lot of the stress, a lot of the reality that happens in that sector. My job in the before times was to take them on tours, take them to the Whitney, take them around Chelsea to go look at art, meditate, exercise their eyes, and have chats about it. Because storytelling is a huge part of trying to convince the legal system of what you believe in. And I also had the chance to curate all the art inside of the office space and continue to bring in these times and activities within all of the legal work that I'm doing there. There are so many intersections where you find that creativity that brings you inside and outside of the arts. It is about how you apply all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting to say that because I find that a lot of students today, especially in college, are like, because of this necessity to sort of need money and for financial reasons to just, go throughout college, and even for those who have to pay out of pocket and still have to work throughout school, I think they find themselves in situations where they're juggling multiple types of jobs at once, like being a waitress, but then also doing an internship, which I personally have experienced myself as well. And I think it's important that regardless of you thinking, oh, this is something that I have to do, but like I don't want to do for the rest of my life, and how would these skills that I have for this job apply in the future? I think you realize that these things actually do apply. Like even something as simple as waitressing, you know, people skills, these things are like being able to talk in front of a group of people like today. These things are things that will eventually apply in the future. And whether or not you realize you're exercising those qualities, and you're still going to be using them just in a different aspect. So I think that's also a really important factor of that. I think considering all we discussed today, what do you think would have changed within the art world after the pandemic, after we sort of overcome all that we are overcoming today, if we will ever anytime soon?
Yeah, I'm not so much into predictions, but the way I see things is that we need to keep pushing, and that the fights are everywhere. So maybe part of your personal push and agenda to see something different is to do it yourself, to advocate for it every chance you get. Not just for yourself either, but thinking about the person next to you, the person directly behind you. Especially as a person of color, there are moments where I'm in the room alone, very much alone. And that is when I question, what did I have that got me here? And how do I pass it on? How do I share it? And it is constantly also a consideration of, why haven't other people done this? What has been difficult about it? And I have to step back and analyze it, question it, and bring all my friends.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because when thinking about this situation, it's very unpredictable. And I think to predict something like this and what will come out on the other side is kind of, it's not easy, because we're dealing with this day by day, and it's changing every day. So it's not something that we can really think about, like what's going to happen 5 years from now. And so I think just that, as thinking of how you go about your everyday life, just thinking like, hey, I'm just only going to take it day by day. I'm not going to stress over what's going to happen a couple months from now. I'm just going to do what I have to do today and advocate for what I want to do and what I want there to eventually be, I think. I also wanted to ask, on a personal note, are there any sort of rituals or self-care things that you've done for yourself during the pandemic?
Well, I continue to learn. I make time to read, which was all the time I used to take during my commute. I realized I didn't have that, not having to commute anywhere. So I really forced myself to have that time to read or to listen to a podcast. And that has really kept me grounded in continuing to connect the dots with everything that happens. And that the consistency of giving myself breaks throughout the day is part of the care routine. And I also, it's not so much that it's self-care, but it's care to take the moment to call up a family member, to call up a friend, in the same way that we would have gotten dinner together, or I would have called on a birthday. Now, every other day is a special day to reach back out to people that I know support me, or people that I support, and I want to show that care too. So it isn't always a reliance of self-care, but of care.
Yeah, I always find it so fascinating to think about how people are coping during this time, and what they're sort of what sort of things that they're doing to pass their time if they are. And so I want to open up the discussion to everyone who's here today. And if you guys have any other questions or any comments, you can feel free to either put them through the chat or, yeah. So if you do, please do so. But if you don't, that's fine too. Thank you so much for being here. Professor Nagel's on screen, if you would like to say. Yeah, sure.
First, thank you so very much, Eva, for all the work also that you do, and connecting the arts with the immigration issues. And you work also on the LENAP on their ground. So my question is related to the artist payment and what you brought up earlier. Is there kind of a thumb rule? Because people who might be interested also in supporting the arts would not know how to pay, how much to pay also for an artist. So is there somewhere a website or also or could you provide something, Eva, even for
Yes.
this?
Actually, there was a big collection, a collective that sprouted well before the exhibition of Decolonizes Place, especially around activism with student debt and artist debt. What does that look like? And the project that came about it is titled Wage for Work. I'm going to add a link to it. Into the conversation, because they have very important guidelines that take into consideration the budget of an organization. So the budget for an organization at a museum and what they should be thinking about paying versus what a smaller nonprofit versus what a gallery space will kind of bring together. And so working artists for a greater economy, that's what WAGE stands for. They're really kind of doing research, they're doing teach-ins, they're doing lectures, but that research is about also having that transparency. So the rule of thumb that a lot of places are guiding themselves by is this open resource. Wage for Work is a great resource about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nagel, for that question.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Shreya.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask, I don't know if I'm mistaken, but you are a freelance curator, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so when you're working with exhibitions and doing proposals, well, this isn't a question necessarily about proposals, it's more about location. How do you find the right location to house the art you're trying to showcase or workshops that you're formulating with other people?
A lot of that comes through collaboration. So honestly, it is about the kind of network that I surround myself with. I ended up doing the exhibition at the Queens Museum instead of the community gallery because the artist that I work with already works with the community. And I am already familiar with that community. So I work with what I know and I support what I know best. In putting together proposals too, I also don't limit myself to where or what I can propose to. I can propose to large institutions in the city, but I'm going to propose with what I'm bringing forward. If they do not like the proposal, if they do not approve of the artist, if they don't think the artists are of the quality they're looking for, if they don't like the idea or my idea does not align with the mission, that's up to them. I'm going to take it where it is welcome. One of the the challenges about that is that instead of holding something to their high regard, it's the other way around. You know, if you get into an elevator with a celebrity, you're not in there with them because they're a celebrity. They're in there with you because you appreciate them and because you know what their work is and you're on par. People, we all bleed the same. And that's the same with institutions. You let them know what is important. As an emerging voice, as an artist, you are the canary in the cave of the world. They're only the platform.
Thank you so
much. That really helps, but
no, that was helpful. That was really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks, Shamika, for that last question. I thought that was really kind of inspiring to hear in that sense. I think Jocelyn. So Jocelyn actually has a comment for you, Eva. She said that she was also born in Queens, but her parents are from Toluca, Mexico. So
that's where I was born.
Yeah. So that's just another comment that came.
Welcome to the club. You can please follow up with me via email. Angelica, you have my email. You can also follow me on my social media.
Yeah.
Check out my website. It is a constant battle of what you see and what you want to represent and the light that's given to it. And again, I advocate for that idea that you already have, that inkling that you have, the gut feeling. You go with it into any space that you approach. And sometimes that can be really hard, but that is one of the strengths about realizing who you are. And Angelica, we have the topics, we have the language, and we have been constantly thinking about in terms of marginalization.
Mm-hmm.
We're not on the margins anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to change that language at some point, in the same way that the journalist, the NPR journalist for Latino USA, Maria Hinojosa, she always reminds people that she has never used the word minority to describe any population she has reported on.
Right. Yeah. I also try to stray away from using the word minority.
Mm-hmm.
I think trying to talk about groups like these that are, I guess marginalized, but in the sense it's just a construct. And I think that to make it more normalized in today's society is definitely something. I think, also being a woman of color, being Hispanic, it was never something that I was like, oh, this is who I am, like I'm lesser, but I never saw myself as lesser. And that's not something that anybody should see themselves as. It's all a construct and it's all systemic. So yeah, I agree. It's not a term that I think should be widely used in this sense, especially in an academic setting.
Yeah, and as being an academic setting, we should also be even more aware of the power of the words, of the written words, of the archive, who and what is in it.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you so much for this and for just talking with us again. Lots of thank yous.
Thank you again for coming. We're so excited about this series and the discussion that is resulting from it. Thank you so much, Eva. Your words of wisdom were so enlightening to hear, and you give us hope for the future and for the world of art.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.